So welcome everyone to Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, a conversation circle sponsored by Still and Moving Center every Saturday afternoon. And during this year, we are taking up the entire year's theme of Light on the Path. And as Renée was reading at the back cover of our Still and Moving Center Almanac, there's this idea of the mind and actually the heart too, growing luminous. And that is very much a concept that is behind this week's theme of Noetic ethics. And I'd like to start by reading the quote for the week in the Still Moving Center Almanac. Noetic ethics: each human being as a self-determining agent is responsible for the opportunities and obstacles of his own making. And that's from Hermes. And we have here to speak with us Judy Saltzman. Judy Saltzman is one of our treasured presenters from several times in the past. She is a philosopher and professor of emeritus of religious studies, and she taught for most of her career at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, which has a wonderful religious studies department. She has spoken worldwide, bringing papers of her own to many different venues, perhaps most notably recently that I know about at the World Parliament of Religions. She is going to speak to us today on a really beloved figure from history, Anne Frank. And she's going to, in doing that, share with us some of these ideas behind this idea of noetic ethics, and as someone lived it in her lifetime. So Judy, we'll let you take it away. And we're being helped by Renée, who's going to give us a little bit of a slide presentation of Anne Frank's quotations.
Thank you very much, Renee. I was also at the East-West Philosophers Conference in Hawaii.
Yes.
May a year ago, and we saw each other.
That's true. And you've been there many times.
I got to speak about the subject of compassion in Judaism and Buddhism, which went over very well, and it has something to do with our subject today. So could your friend put the quotations from Anne Frank, please? Thank you.
We're almost there. That looks very beautiful.
All right, it is. It looks lovely. Okay. This is a wonderful insight into karma from a person who's only a child, and she doesn't really have a religion that talks about karma, though it's a religion very much that believes in free will and choice. And she says our lives are fashioned by choices. First we make choices, then our choices make us. I mean, how very insightful. Sometimes we might have an insight that we've made a mistake in life, but in a sense, someone might say, well, you chose that path. You chose to marry that person, or you chose to take that job, or whatever your choice was. And then maybe you find out later that it wasn't the right choice, or maybe you look back on your life and you find some good choices. Okay, let's look at another slide. Okay, parents can only give good advice or put us on the right path, but the final forming of our character lies in our own hands. Now, this is really a wonderful quotation, because there's so many people who want to blame their parents for their problems, but every person really is an individual, as Leibniz would say, divine monad. And when born, makes their own choices. Now, if they have good parents, and she did, especially her father, Otto Frank, who survived the concentration camp and published her diary, he realized the tremendous intellect and value of his daughter, who died at 14 in the concentration camp. And they were Dutch Jews, and their crime was essentially simply being Jews. They had to hide in an attic for about 2 years, where a very kind Christian family held them, and then they were eventually betrayed and arrested. And I remember in the movie, Otto Frank, her father, says when they're being arrested by the Nazis, he says, "For 2 years we have lived in fear. Now we will live in hope." He says to his family. Actually, there were two families up there. But I mean, it's utterly tragic because they had done nothing wrong except to have a religion that was different than Christianity. And in that time, there was all this bigotry and prejudice and phony anthropology that Hitler had put out, and people believed it. Okay, let's look at another quote. "Laziness may look inviting, but uh, who gives you only work gives you true satisfaction." Yeah, I mean, she certainly realized the value of a work ethic, and it was, of course, toward the good. It wasn't something like the motto over the concentration camp Auschwitz, which was survived by Dr. Viktor Frankl, whose work I also plan to address, was Arbeit macht frei, work sets you free. And of course, this was a bit of a sardonic joke by the Germans, because when you went into this place, if you looked young and healthy enough to be able to work, then you got to live and to work under terrible conditions and very little good food. But if you look sickly, they'd send you right off to the gas chamber. But she realizes that life is much better and makes oneself much happier if they find a working path. And she might have been very great in some profession if she had lived, because she's such a good writer as a child, and she lived to be only 14. Okay, can we look at another quote? Okay, "I keep my ideals because in spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart." Now, that's actually at the end of the movie that's read out. And I think it's one of her most powerful quotes. Here she is being trapped from being outside, doing other things that young people enjoy, being with other young people and having a wonderful time. And yet she's not at all bitter at people. She's not a misanthrope. And then, of course, "I want to be useful or bring enjoyment to all people, even those I never met. I want to go on living even after my death. And that's why I'm so grateful to God for having given me this gift, which I can use to develop myself and express all that's inside me." Well, of course, the Jews don't have any particular specific philosophy about after death states. Of course, there are several different types of Judaism: Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist, even Humanist. And I know I had one rabbi say to me once that if someone is dead, they are with God. And there was no other expression of immortality. But at least she realizes that there's something that will go on living after death, and that she wants this. Clearly, she has a love of life in spite of being horribly persecuted for no good reason other than that she's born into the Jewish religion, which she still loved in spite of that. Okay, could we go to the next, please? Yeah, it's a wonder I haven't abandoned all my ideals. They seem so absurd and impractical, yet I cling to them because I still believe, in spite of everything, the people are truly good at heart. Again, that leads up to that quotation. And I remember when I was young and wanting to major in philosophy in college, I can remember my father saying to me, you know, what you're doing is very impractical. In fact, you'll never get a job. I had so many people say that to me. And I think that's a terrible thing to say to a young person who's an idealist. I mean, George Bernard Shaw said, if you're not an idealist at 20, you have no heart. If you're still an idealist at 40, you have no head. And he applied that to socialism. But I mean, yes, you might get a little more realistic at 40. But of course, she is realizing that it's better to have ideals for the good of the world than to be bitter about her own situation, which she certainly could have been, and the ordinary person would have been. Okay, are there any other quotes? Oh, yes, I feel the suffering of millions, and yet when I look up at the sky, I somehow feel that everything will change for the better, and that this cruelty too shall end, that peace and tranquility will return once more. In the meantime, I must hold on to my ideals. Well, this reminds me very much of the poet William Cullen Bryant, an American poet who, at the age of 17, during the American Renaissance period, which was about 1830, 1840, William Cullen Bryant says, to go forth under the open sky and listen to nature's teachings, and this will do you a great deal of good, he says in the poem. So, I mean, all they could do is peek out the window of the attic. But, she still feels this love of nature in her heart, obviously. Are there any other? Okay. Well, that's a really enough to start with, these beautiful quotations. And I just want to talk about really the four stages of the dialectic in Plato. And I'm sorry, having been ill, that I haven't been able to do a PowerPoint diagram. But there are four stages of the dialectic, and what sometimes is called Plato's cave. And Plato says in the seventh book of the Republic that we all live as if we're in a cave. That is his analogy. And that we know darkness on the lowest level of the dialectic is what is called icasia. That is, if you were sitting chained and behind you there were figures which were illumined on a screen in front of you by a fire. Of course, that's the only kind of light they had in Plato's day. And you saw these images of animals and other beings, and you thought they were real. And the world is fragmented and not together and not harmonious. And people had the attitude of your religion, your country, my country, your ethnicity, my ethnicity, and let's fight about it because I'm better than you are. That would be one level of reaction. A person on that level could be, for example, if they were Jewish, Dr. Frankl, it says in his book Man's Search for Meaning, that he became a very famous psychiatrist, and he was in Auschwitz, which was the most horrible concentration camp in Poland, and he survived. And one of the reasons he survived is that he had a great deal of love and respect for some of the comrades that were in Auschwitz with him who were Christians opposing Hitler. They weren't Jewish, and he saw a great deal of unity of the world. And he said those who had some sense of faith and love for humanity that were able to visualize a better situation survived better than the physically stronger who had no faith or love for humanity. So it was important that we understand that um, on that level, Icasia. I mean, and I remember meeting a Jewish friend at UC Berkeley, and she said, I hate the Germans. I hate their language. I hate their culture. I hate everything about them. And I said, don't you realize that Yiddish is a form of Low German dialect with some Hebrew and Russian in it? And don't you realize that there are many Germans who oppose Hitler? Like there was a brave young Catholic couple, a brother and sister, Sophie Skoll and her brother, who put out anti-Nazi literature at the University of Munich, München. And Sophie was so courageous that she did it in spite of knowing she would be arrested. And she and her brother were actually beheaded. They suffered a horribly brutal death. And at one point, Dr. Frankel says that if you die with the Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Yechod, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, or the Lord's Prayer on your lips, or whatever, that you are an equal martyr and idealist. So that would be the cave level of this. I mean, she could have reacted with a great deal of anger and hatred. And, I know people to this day who are Jewish who are just appalled if anyone learns to speak German. But if you realize that German culture produced Einstein, great universities, wonderful music, the Bauhaus in Berlin, great art, literature, Goethe, the language itself is very beautiful and lilting. It's not Hitler screaming. If you realize that, there's no reason to hate people because there was a 13-year aberration of their culture from 1933 to 45. Well, I guess it's about 12 years and the Nazis were deposed, unfortunately, had to be by force. But if we look at the next level of dialectic, it would be pistis, which means knowledge in Greek. It can also mean belief. It's the origin of the word epistemology, theory of knowledge. Well, maybe you're still in the cave, but you get a little wiser and say, well, the Germans were victims of a mass psychosis. That the Treaty of Versailles was unfair. After World War One, it took away the German industrial area of the Ruhr. It ruined their economy. They were starving. And after all, we have to realize that they were suffering terribly, as well as the Jews. At the end of World War II, they were being horribly bombed, which included the firestorming of Hamburg, and women and children were bombed. I know a family who were in Freiburg, which is down near Switzerland in southern Germany, who spent 6 weeks in a bunker, and horrible things happened. The German soldiers went over to the Alsace area and raped French women, and then the French soldiers came over and raped German women. And I had a friend who lived down in that area in a place called Rheinhausen by Freiburg, who said that there was a woman or several women who were mentally ill because of the horrible experience in their village. And I mean, they were wonderful when I visited them, wonderful hospitality. And so you could get on a little higher level, but not a forgiving level, not one of heart or any real caring. But Dr. Frankel and Anne Frank get above this level that we would see in the divided line if you've ever looked at a diagram of the Republic. And that if you come out of the cave and look at the sunlight of the world and realize there's a sun, there are real people, there's wonderful air, there are trees and grass and real animals. If you get to some state of reality, you can get to a state of dianoia, which is science. And at least Viktor Frankl gets to this state because when he gets out of the concentration camp, he realizes that some of his friends, Jewish friends who were in the concentration camp, were very bitter. He and a friend were out walking one day, and the friend said, "Oh, there's a German farmer's crop. Let's go trample it. Let's ruin their flower bed. Let's show our hatred toward our German neighbors because they hated us so much, and they were ignorant and cruel, some of them." Well, even in 1970, when I was in Germany as a Fulbright scholar, there are many Germans who said to me, "Wir haben gar nicht gewusst," meaning we didn't know that they thought their Jewish neighbors were on vacation who had disappeared. And here is this maniac spewing all this hatred. And they said they didn't know. And of course, they didn't want to know. They were too frightened. But they did suffer horribly, including very young children and people who had nothing to do with it, even people who opposed Hitler and managed to get out suffered. But the German people suffered terribly because of their own mistakes. And, Dr. Frankel realizes this, and Anne Frank certainly did later when Dr. Frankel invented what is called logotherapy, a form of talk therapy based on the idea that there is a higher consciousness. He has some idea of the noesis. He saw all kinds of German patients who were Christian or atheist or agnostic or also Jewish as he was. So we can get to that level. But when you get to the level of Anne Frank and these beautiful sayings in her diary, of which there are many more than we read, but this gives you a good sample of her thought, it's very obvious that she's on a noetic level. In other words, Plato said the soul is the perceiver, it looks directly upon ideas. And this is very much like Patanjali, uh, the yoga aphorisms. If you could get to this higher level of consciousness of the nous, or what is called noetic, you can look directly and understand what justice is or what courage is. And this young girl certainly has a lot of courage. Uh, what sophrosyne, prudence is, or what wisdom, Sophia is. And those are the four Platonic virtues. And I think Anne Frank has all of them, justice, courage, wisdom, and a sense of prudence or sophrosyne, knowing what to do in situations. So it's a tragedy, and yet there's something glorious that a child this young would have these insights, and no doubt, she's probably been reborn as some great being and will make another contribution. But of course, we don't know who that is. But at any rate, both Anne Frank, I think, and Dr. Frankel made their tremendous contributions to this horrible situation in which 6 million Jewish people were murdered. And, she could have had a reaction down in Icasia of, hatred, violence, separateness. And I can remember even when I was at Cal Poly, uh, I invited a young woman who was in many ways very brilliant and wonderful. She was a student rabbi, and I invited her to my class. And then when she found out one of the exchange students, who was a good friend of mine, born in 1952, when she found out that my friend was German, she wouldn't speak to her. She was very rude. And I thought this was just not something worthy of the rabbinate, which she did eventually get in the Reform Jewish congregation. But yet her view was that all Germans, even those born post-war, were, people not to be spoken to, whose language was to be shunned. And, this could be a very much a reaction of the cave. And yet a higher reaction is love for other human beings. It's said that the Dalai Lama, of course, whose people in Tibet were horribly murdered, there were about half the population of Tibet were killed, millions of people. The Dalai Lama is not at all bitter toward the Chinese people. He has to admit that he doesn't like their government or Zhou Enlai, who did this, but he doesn't hate. And in fact, he has deep compassion for the suffering of the Chinese, for all people. And he said that when he felt compassion for other people, even when he was in great pain, he was in an ambulance being taken to a hospital, that he felt better if he would look out the window and see the suffering of India, such as an old man dying by the side of the road with no caregiver, or naked children who clearly didn't have enough food, and other terrible poverty that you see in India. And he said he felt a great deal of compassion, and he felt better himself, even though he was having apparently a pancreatitis attack, he said, which he survived. But at any rate, he's an extraordinary human being as well. So some people are extraordinary and can
Yes.
have these reactions. So I'd
Mm.
love to take questions on this topic.
Mhm. That's wonderful. Thank you, Judy, so much. And drawing from your own heritage and your own knowledge of Judaism, Judy is one of the most foremost scholars that I know of Jewish philosophy and going back to ancient times. So thank you for bringing that through. Something that you are still able to make very, very real for us in terms of someone facing choices. How are they going to respond in their moral nature to something that was so horrible? And to see someone that young rise up to a response level that we could consider noetic, that was filled with light, filled with this like inherent recognition, not knowing that each person that she was looking upon was someone to be respected, like that she would still believe in human nature. Just truly remarkable, and thank you for bringing that out so well. So yeah, we'll set this conversation open for ideas that people have in regard to this idea of a kind of higher ethics, not just an ethics of following the rules that have been taught to us. This is the way we should do things. This is why, this is the set of obligations that we have, but something, a more enlightened approach, ethical approach. And yes, Roger, so great to have you, Roger Epstein, and newlywed again.
Newlywed again. I like that.
He's joining us from his honeymoon. Great to have you.
No, I'm home from my honeymoon in Lake Como, Italy.
Mm.
It was
Oh,
very beautiful. But before I went to Lake Como, I was in Frankfurt, Germany for 4 days. And we did a program that was inspired by a conversation I had in Bhutan, of all places, last summer with a German woman. And when I told her about the forgiveness programs we've done in Hawaii for many years, she said, "Oh, we Germans need forgiveness. We still feel shame and guilt for what happened in World War II." So this resonated with me a lot because I was born the day Germany surrendered in 1945. And I grew up in an almost all Jewish neighborhood. And of all the times I've been to Europe, I'd never been to Germany. And I began to realize that maybe I had something still that I was carrying that was negative about Germans. And so we ended up, I don't know if you know Chuck Spezzano. He's a wonderful guy here. He's been gone, he lives in Hawaii, but he's been doing programs he calls it Psychology of Vision in Germany for 40 years. So short story, we ended up with a program. We did a couple of short programs here in Hawaii. And then we went to Germany and were there on my birthday, May the 8th, and had a couple of forgiveness people, Fred Luskin, you know, and Carolyn Sakai, who's here. And then Chuck did a 3-day program on basically ancestral healing, which was really the idea of how do you let go of these things? And it's 80 years later. And the story that Judy just told about the rabbi and the other people she mentioned who just couldn't forgive. And of course, that's all on your own head. And it is incredible that even without much time for training in her short life, that Anne Frank got it. And really incredible. And maybe, you know, we're moving towards people living more of that. You know, our culture is so based on revenge and getting even, and we seem to glorify that when every tradition and every wise culture tells you that you're only hurting yourself when you don't forgive. So I'm hopeful. I throw out one more thought. Many of us feel we're struggling through a very difficult time now, where we're not in a concentration camp, of course, but we are in a very difficult period of division and negativity and seemingly hurting each other. And this would be a good challenge for us to not get angry, to not be mad at what we see as something close to what the Nazis did to not only the Jews, but other people that they felt inferior. And I just wonder, Judy, if you see a correlation there and an idea of how we could continue or do as Anne Frank did and try to take this fourth level of understanding that we're all human, we're all doing the best we can. And, you know, maybe even find love and forgiveness as it's happening to us.
oh yes, that's a wonderful comment. I want to say first of all that I am not really as deep a scholar of Judaism as I am of Buddhism and Hinduism. And I'm basically a world religion scholar. I know very little Hebrew. I did take a course in Hebrew recently and I learned a lot. I'm grateful for it. But I think essentially if one is unable to forgive even someone born in 1952, and when I visited her home, all over their house they have signs like, remember once the Jews couldn't even use the public parks in the city of Freiburg, and remember these things and never let it happen again. And in the city of Freiburg, there is an empty chair on a slab where when Kristallnacht occurred, the people of Freiburg burned the synagogue. And when the war was over, they offered to rebuild the synagogue. And the Jewish people said, no, thank you, we're leaving forever. We'll never come back to your city. So there was just an empty chair on a concrete slab and a profuse apology in German.
Hmm.
That was something. And of course, forgiving of people they have to realize that we are all human and can make mistakes. If one looks at Hannah Arendt's totalitarianism, and she was a German Jewish girl who actually just studied with the philosopher Heidegger and is said to have had an affair with him. Having been a student in Germany, I know some German professors expected that of women students. But great, Heidegger was a really terrible person. He actually showed up at the University of Freiburg in a Nazi uniform to give a lecture and wouldn't allow his Jewish colleague Edmund Husserl, the founder of a philosophical system called phenomenology, to come back to the university. And I remember Professor Marjorie Green once saying at the World Congress of Philosophy, she banged her cane on the floor and said, Heidegger is just plain evil and shouldn't be read anymore. Well, Heidegger is actually kind of abstract metaphysical stuff that's very hard to understand. And I don't think he's a really great philosopher, but Hannah Arendt wrote this brilliant book on totalitarianism. And one of the major points she makes is that if you scream a lie long enough and loud enough, people will believe it, especially if you're in a position of authority.
Mhm.
And here is Hitler appearing to be the great Fuhrer, the savior of Germany. And he's got a scapegoat, the Jews, the people who were in opposition to the Christ. I mean, half of Germany is Catholic and the other half is Protestant. And so there's a great deal of, religious feeling in Germany. There are, of course, many atheists, and there's still a minority of Jewish people. And I've been in Berlin at night, and police are still guarding the synagogue.
Mm.
Well, it's even happened here at the Reform Synagogue that there's a police car in front of the synagogue Friday night, even though they have a high security system.
So a more elevated ethical response might be.
The more elevated ethical response. Well, it would be, first of all, forgiveness that there was starvation, rickets in Germany. Rickets caused paranoia, and paranoia, of course, can produce Nazis. And there was a great deal of misery that the German people economically suffered. And in a sense, no matter how horrible the Nazis were, they weren't all Nazis. I mean, when I was in Germany, again, my experience was we had people who had said, wir haben gar nicht gewusst, we didn't know. But then there were many others, like my friend Rita's family, who were very hospitable in Rheinhausen, that her father was impressed into the army at the age of 16, and he had been forced into an SS school at 12. Well, he was Catholic, and he didn't believe it at all. But as a boy, he couldn't really get out of it. But at the age of 16, he's in the German army with orders to use a rifle, which he didn't know how to use. He lost several fingers on his left hand because he couldn't use a rifle properly. The sergeant said to them before he was shot, just get captured by the Americans. You'll get well treated and get good food. And Rita's father, Ulrich, eventually, he said they were captured by the French. which was not as bad as being captured by the Russians, who were not forgiving. Some of the men who invaded Russia were kept for like 7 years, and many died. And of course, that was a horribly stupid and cruel thing that Hitler did to invade Russia, and there were many good men who were lost, good people on both sides. But
Can I open it up for some other folks here so we can make sure that we get to hear from everyone? I guess the question on the table is to you, what is a way of responding to any life situation, and in particular, very, very difficult ones that seem completely unjust, and what is an ethical response that we can give to these different situations. Forgiveness has been one response. We've also heard heroism in terms of, for example, the Christian couple or family that took in Anne Frank's family and another. They didn't just forgive the Germans, they also actively did something in rebellion that obviously could have been very dangerous to their own lives. So those would be two possibilities: forgiveness and courage. What else? What do you think, Carolyn?
well, I would say understanding of the situation. Again,
Just a
in
minute.
Germany, the starvation.
Okay, sorry. I was just wondering if she had any friends in this. I mean, because sometimes friendship is a less noticed way of helping somebody. So I just throw that in. I mean, obviously the strong moral responses are the ones we think we need, and they have to carry the greatest risk. But was there anything, Judy, to a community feeling of friendship or that could persist around her?
I mean, when I was in Germany,
Yeah.
In
No, not
Anne Frank's life.
you, but for Anne Frank, was there some kind of friendship in Holland where they were living?
well, I think she had friends who were not of her religion, certainly, and the family that hid, the Jewish family, were certainly more than friends. They were willing to take great risks to hide the Jewish family for as long as they did successfully. I mean, today, the Anne Frank house is one of the biggest tourist attractions in Amsterdam next to the Reich Museum. There's a long line for people waiting to go into that attic and see where she lived with her family and another family.
I think
Yeah.
too, Otto Frank's secretary was not hiding them, but I think she was bringing in supplies to them. So that would have, I think, provided some sense of friendship and community. Bob,
Well,
did you have ideas that you wanted to bring up?
I do. And this is, I don't know, this is kind of a tricky area for me. But as I see the Noetic, um, it's really connected to me in how the mind actually works. And I get a little nervous with Plato's dialectic because it's a very subjective, objective way of looking at things. In other words, you're sort of seeing through illusion to what is right there, but it is, to some extent, very much a dualistic kind of way of thinking. And that's been a large part of not only Western philosophy, but also Eastern philosophy. And I think that's a little bit what I see as the key point. Um, Francis, for example, who just passed away as the Pope, was Francis the First. Of all the popes, there's only been one Francis. Leo, he's the 14th. In other words, Francis was different, I think, than Aquinas or even Augustine, in that Francis, the mind and heart, which I don't think are different, the mind and heart immediately grasp something. And once that immediate grasping happens, then you have a kind of noetic identity. And that gives you the beginning of fellow feeling and compassion and what Thich Nhat Hanh called interbeing. You may wrap it around different ways of talking, but that immediate feeling is fundamental. And, one of the things that Hannah Arendt said in totalitarianism was she gave a famous term called the banality of evil. Evil is banal. It's boring. It's uninteresting. It doesn't let your heart really express itself. And Viktor Frankl said, I could tell looking at someone in the camp whether they would be alive the next morning. And again, if that heart was functioning and they were actually communicating something about that fundamental will or hope that you mentioned, then they would be alive the next day. If they didn't have that, then essentially they would have given up hope and they had no reason to live. It was always too hard to live, but you could do it. And I guess I'll end with my two heroes in this regard, which is Nelson Mandela and Bishop Tutu. And this didn't happen in Germany, but in South Africa with apartheid, they actually came up with a possibility. Nelson Mandela said, okay, I'm going to be the first Black leader of Africa. I'm going to develop something. And then how do we deal with it? And he's the only one, I think, in almost human history that said, let's really deal with it. And he came up with reconciliation. Anyone could come to ask for forgiveness, but first they had to face the people that they had done this to, and they had to explain what they had done and why they had done it. One of the amazing things of the East and West Germans was when they opened up the Stasi files, they found out a lot of people that were Stasi informers that they didn't know about, and that that hiddenness is what was harmful. But in Bishop Tutu and Nelson Mandela, this reconciliation, if you could bring it forth, if you could say, yes, I did this, then you could ask for forgiveness and you would be given forgiveness. That was the step that Nelson Mandela insisted on, that, if you take your step, we'll take our step, and then we can move on. And I don't know, it's a complicated thing, but it begins with that kind of the mind, the noetic mind that just simply intuits, grasps something without a dialectical process, but just immediately grasp it. In Buddhism, we'd call it Buddha nature. It's not external or internal. Self is self, nature is nature, but they're immediate. That's Buddha nature. Anyway, that's a complicated thing, but I think that noetic intuition is something that almost isn't a process. If you pile it up on one side or the other, then you're living in the past or you're planning in the future. But as Dogen Zenji said, it's right now. And anything that's past is past right now. How are you holding on to it right now? And, we're all dealing with that. We're dealing with Trump, yes. I mean, we're dealing with the current situation that was mentioned, but right now, what is slavery right now? And we all carry pieces of that. It's part of our personality. It's part of our character. It's part of our history and heritage. But what does the mind do right now? I think the noetic power is just cutting through all that out there. And then what you do with it is immediate.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bob. I don't know about everybody else here, but I was not aware of that process that Nelson Mandela and Reverend Tutu made available for this reconciliation to happen. And yes, that seems like such a act of noesis, this noetic ethics, to realize that it is possible to reclaim the good within oneself. As soon as we're willing to release that which has blocked us from living that better life, then yes, let's pull you back into the fold.
And you reclaim it because that's who you are.
Yes,
I mean, that's what Dogen Zenji said.
absolutely.
Practice is realization. Realization is practice.
Yeah.
Buddha nature is not something you're going to get to in the end. It's right there, or it isn't, and then you move forward step by step.
I mean, the clerk also felt that it was worthwhile to work with Mandela. I mean, they both got the Nobel Prize because, for one thing, there were so many sanctions against South Africa because of apartheid that 7% of the people were in control of the rest of the black population. And it was originally their country. I mean, the Boers, the Dutch Reformed Church and all that were in control, but they have a bishop of the Dutch Reformed Church. I mean, Mandela, uh, working together, and eventually de Klerk opened up his heart. And if you see the film Invictus, I was so impressed that one of the things Mandela does when he walks into his office the first time, and he's the president of South Africa, all the white workers are packing up in the office, and he says, "Please don't leave. You know how to run this government, and I'm new." And then he says to his black guards, he says, "Work with the white guards. They protected de Klerk. You can learn from them how to protect me." And so what he does is immediately great reconciliation. And I simply use Plato. I mean, I'm not saying that that's the only way to look at it, but maybe a process has gone on that you're unaware of when your heart does open up. And, perhaps you have hated someone or been very angry at someone, or someone who has a different political and religious view that you do. And, for a while you haven't wanted to speak to them. And then I remember once I had a person who was one of my caregivers who expressed some political views which are entirely opposite of mine. And I simply said, "Well, what is he going to do for you, if this man becomes president again?" And of course, there is a lot of concern now about the rise of authoritarianism in the US, and people being put in places like Guantanamo or deported to El Salvador and such. So
We could probably go deep into that. So let's stay on this topic of the noetic ethics that are possible to us. I'd love to have a chance for people who haven't spoken yet to maybe be able to do so. We have just a few minutes left. So Monica, can I call on you?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh,
We-
you can? Great, great.
Yes.
Well, first of all, I want to say, Judy, thank you very, very much for this presentation. I remember reading the book as a kid in school, and I remember being impressed, but nothing compared to what I am now with her unconditional love. And it occurred to me, Judy, while you were relaying these ideas, and after the quotes, the question came up: how many incarnations has this young kid anchored herself in that state of consciousness where, at the most horrendous time on earth, this would be available to her and so available to her that I, as a kid, we would be reading her book in class, and of course, Judy giving us even more insights. And so this state of consciousness is a major issue for someone, particularly someone that young, to have that level of merciful response to something so completely horrific. It just makes you believe in the doctrines of karma and reincarnation that much more. And it just instills to this student's mind, at least, the idea that this becoming noetic, we never know when we will have a need of a certain level of response to what's going on in the world. And she certainly demonstrated that. So I'm grateful that in this time that we're in right now, with the insanity that is clearly building, and I won't go any further, but I'm grateful that you chose this time, and of course, dear Judy, to speak about her and relay these ideas again. And it just gives us a reminder to invest in the noetic, invest in unconditional love and wisdom. And also, forgive without my glasses here, Bob, the ideas that you brought forth about South Africa, I don't know if you could be more timely in relation to the other insanity that's going on regarding the African American, the African and Black people in general. So we all need, no matter how much love we think we have, or inspiration or connection with higher self, we need even more. So I'm very grateful for this day and this offering, Judy. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your wonderful comment.
Yes.
'Cause
Well, I feel as if, Monica, without my asking, you gave us a vote of thanks to Judy that I think we all can really warmly agree with wholeheartedly, that, this was a topic that is so painful to hear, and yet to hear such an elevated response from someone in, someone so young in their life is really inspirational at the same time. So you made that so clear to us. I want to also thank Sharone Gracia, who just today got the request that she put together, if possible, a slide presentation of these Anne Frank quotes. And it was just beautiful. It's so lovely the way it was presented. Thank you so much. And, so it was a treat for the eyes as well as for the soul to hear those quotes and having you read them, Judy. I'd like to let you know about the next couple of weeks. We're going to have the topic of karma and choice for next week. And our Bob Buss, who's right there, is going to be giving that to us. And Buddhist Hindu tradition you're going to be speaking from? What did you decide? I know you told me.
Actually, as Monica said, we can talk about karma and reincarnation and how it relates to us today. And it's going to be really a general thing, starting with yoga and Hinduism, but also how it's been interpreted later through Buddhism and Sikhism and various other religions. So it'll be a general study of karma and its reincarnation.
Okay, wonderful. And then the next week we'll be looking at anger to patience, and we're going to go to Plum Village again and Thich Nhat Hanh to look at that. And I think it will be a really good companion piece as well to today's topic, which we are so grateful to you for sharing with us Judy. She is newly out of the hospital, and she still agreed to give this presentation to us. And we're really just so appreciative. Thank you so much.
Yes,
Thank you.
so glad you're better, Judy. Thank you.
Mm,
Thank you. Good to be with everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you, Judy. That was wonderful.
Okay. Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Great to have you back, Roger.
Thank you, dear. Nice to be back. It was a fascinating trip. You and I need to get together sometime.
I love it. Let's do it.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Thank you again. Everybody take care. Be well and safe.
You too. Nice to have you, Truth. I'm glad you can join us.
Yes.
Mhm.
Beautiful.
Thank you for your
Bye-bye.
comments, everyone.
Yeah. Judy, were you satisfied? Did you? I was so pleased by what you did. Thank you so much. Were you satisfied?
Well, I should have put up a diagram of the 4 stages of the dialectic, but I just haven't been well enough to work on the computer. But I hope I got across the idea.
You
And
absolutely did. Yes.
Judaism there's a very different approach to the
Uh-huh.
opening of the heart. And actually, when the child goes through the bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, they have the Reform tradition. It means son of the commandment and daughter of the commandment. One of the things they have to do is a project of compassion toward the community. In other words, volunteer at the animal shelter, or go help the elderly, or go help the homeless, or do something. And when
Oh.
you, at the local synagogue, when you see like some young woman is going to bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah, I mean, it'll say her project is to volunteer at the animal shelter, or she'll do something to awaken compassion for animals, or to volunteer to help the elderly or the homeless, or there are a number of things that young people are trained to do as part of Jewish training and ethics. And I'm very impressed with what they do with it.
Oh, I never knew about that. I wondered why there was such a strong compassion element built into Jewish culture. I mean, that it's that service element that, helping out, for those who are downtrodden in any way, that gifting and so on. It's really built in. So I didn't know about that opening of the heart. It's wonderful to hear about. Thank you.
If you read Rabbi Hillel or any of the great Jewish scholars, you'll see that he was once asked, "What is the essence of Judaism? Can you recite it on one foot?" And he said Leviticus 19:18, or love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. That is the entire essence of Torah. And so that means, of course, love your friend. Don't think of your neighbor as your enemy, even if he believes differently or is politically different, or in other ways different ethnicity. But of course, not everyone practices their religion. And this is true of the Jews as well as other religions. So if everyone practiced their own tradition, the world.
It'd be so good. Well, you did a great job practicing, Judy. You gave of yourself when you so didn't feel like it, and we are so deeply appreciative to you. Thank you so much.
Feel better having done it.
I'm so glad. I can only imagine you would. You should. Take care.
Well, thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye now.